I mean, look at what is happening in South Australia. This ambitious goal aiming for 100% net renewable energy by 2027, and they're touted now as the mainland's leader in green power. Look, it is a nonsense. I think that the whole idea of renewables only is a road to ruin. That's my take. Our next guest argues South Australia's high reliance on renewables is actually leading to unreliability and, ironically, the most expensive electricity in the country. And he points to periods where the state still heavily relies on gas and even diesel and imports coal-fired power from Victoria. They don't use our beautiful black stuff in Victoria. They use that dirty brown stuff from your lawn. Let's have a chat about his analysis. Leith Van Onselen, the chief economist at MB Fund, co-founder of Macro Business, joins us. Leith, good to talk to you again. I mean, it's a pretty stark picture you're painting. South Australia, a blackout future. At least they got plenty of red wine to keep them warm, though.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. Look, these numbers just show the lunacy of this all renewables future that's been sold to us. It just does not make sense. So at the moment, South Australia generates over a year about, just over 70% of its electricity from renewable resources. And it's, obviously touted as, a renewable superpower and all this sort of stuff, and the leader and the mainland, et cetera, et cetera. And as you just said, they're aiming to go 100% renewable by 2027. So we're talking only a couple years away here. And that necessarily means they'll have to shut down all their gas-fired and diesel generators. Now, bearing in mind, South Australia shut down its coal generators a few years back. So, it's got basically, it's only fossil fuel or hydrocarbon power generators now are gas and diesel. And just last week, and this happens a lot, especially during winter time. So just last week, Thursday, Friday, I think it was, South Australia, for a 2-day period, the wind died. And obviously it's winter time, right? So you don't get that much sun down south, very short days. So solar also dies, and it's only available for a few hours a day anyway. But, South Australia's wind generation died for at least a day and a half last week. And over that 2-day period, 60% of South Australia's, power generation came from gas and 2% from dirty diesel, right? So how renewable is this? And they've got a plan to literally go fully renewable within a couple of years. And what is not shown in this national energy market data is that there's actually an interconnector between Victoria and South Australia. And as you pointed out at the top, South Australia also imports energy when it needs it from Victoria. And over the same 2-day period, the wind died in Victoria as well. And obviously Victorian winter, often it's cloudy, you don't get much solar at all. So for that same 2-day period, 69% of Victoria's power came from dirty brown coal and 9% from gas. So this whole notion, especially in wintertime, that you can plan an energy system around renewables which are weather dependent. You don't know when this, we never know when it's going to be cloudy skies. We don't know when the wind's going to die. And in wintertime especially, you can die for days on end. This whole notion that we can just run an energy system off renewables is laughable, right? And it's also incredibly expensive, Gary. If you don't mind, I'll just give you a quick example. This is a Queensland example. So, Queensland's got a coal-fired power station in Melbourne, which is Toowoomba.
Yeah.
So it's about 120, it's Darling Downs, about 125, 130 k's from Brisbane. It was built in 2002 for $1.5 billion. So even if you, everything's more expensive now, you could probably build it for about $5 billion. Now, that's an 850 megawatt capacity. So it's not huge, it's, decent size. But to get the same amount of capacity from wind turbines, just to get the nameplate, what I mean by nameplate is it assumes that if these wind turbines ran at full capacity the whole time, which they never do, you'd have to build 284 wind turbines. So most wind turbines are about 3 megawatts. Now, the problem with this, Gary, is that wind turbines usually run at about 1/3 capacity, right? So that means you need 3 times that. So you end up needing about 850 wind turbines to match the capacity of this single coal-fired power station. And the problem with it is these wind turbines will have to be built in dispersed locations right across Queensland, probably way out in the west, certainly a lot further than 125 kilometres. So you've got one coal-fired generator with one set of transmission lines that was very, very cheap to build versus 800 or so wind turbines that have to be built right across Queensland just to get the same capacity. assuming that it's only windy 1/3 of the time. But then you also need tons of battery storage because guess what? You don't know when it's going to be windy. Sometimes you're going to get too much wind and they're all going to be running hard. Other times you're going to get none. So then you need all the battery storage. That costs a hell of a lot of money. So the fact of the matter is this whole notion that renewables are cheaper is just laughable. And this is just one example of many. Because of the massive transmission costs, the massive cost of building these 800 or so wind turbines, which is what you need. You need tons of concrete for each one of them for footings. You need heaps of steel. You need access roads. You've got to bulldoze a whole bunch of land. You've got to make all these access roads to get to them. You've got to maintain them all. You need a web of wires, poles and everything dispersed right across the countryside just to try and match one generator, which is fairly close to Brisbane, which has one set of transmission lines. This is why the cost of this whole adventure leverage up extremely quickly and why it's going to cost us an absolute fortune to go down this road.
And the worst part is a lot of those things have to be, that's the renewable part of it, they have to be renewed every certain amount of time. Batteries about every 10 to 12 years. Wind turbines, they're saying maybe 20 years. Certainly solar panels, maybe 15 if you're lucky. All of these things cost money, and the wind turbines, the current average price, as I understand, is about $25 million a piece. So you got 850 of those. Well, you're the economist. I'll let you do the mathematics. But let's face it, that's a hell of a lot of money. That's
it is
hundreds of billions of dollars.
Absolutely. And a coal-fired power plant would probably last you about 60 years, right? So in that 60-year period, you've probably got to replace this stuff at least 3 times. So again, the cost just leverages up here. And in the end, you end up with less reliable energy because it's weather dependent, right? We never know when the wind's going to blow, when the sun's going to shine. And with energy, you have to match supply with demand, right? It's always, so the only way you can match that supply with demand is to build tons and tons of storage. So we're talking pumped hydro. So, Queensland's building a pumped hydro, starts with B. I just got the name of the place. It's sort of, it's near the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, Barumba.
That's the one. Yeah. So the costs blow out on that. It's not going to be built for another 10 years. But the estimated cost for that's already blown out by about $5 billion to $18 billion. And, who knows what it's going to end up at given the way things are. It'll probably end up being $25 billion or something for one storage project. It doesn't actually provide you with energy. It's just a means of storing energy, right? So you use your excess solar and wind when you have it to pump water uphill. And then at night time when the sun's not out, you then release it. And then that generates the energy. So it's like a giant battery. But these are the sorts of costs we're talking about here. And then you obviously will have to link that hydro station up with billions of dollars worth of transmission wires.
Yeah.
So the whole notion that you can just replace a handful of, hydrocarbon generators, coal, gas, if we ever did go down the road, nuclear, whatever, down the track, with this dispersed network of solar and wind, which is just all over the country with a web of wires and poles and then battery storage and then pump hydro and all this sort of stuff, it just means it's going to be incredibly expensive. You just can't get around the reality of it.
No, you can't. And we've had the Split Yard Creek pumped hydro system in place since the mid-late 70s when Wivenhoe Dam was built west of Brisbane. They had so much excess electricity, coal-fired power in the system. They said, oh, you know what? What we'll do is when we've got to keep the turbines going because you've got to with the big diesel jennies, and we'll keep them going, and we'll just use a bit of that at night when no one's using electricity to pump the water up so that when there's a peak use time coming, we can drop the water down, turn some turbines and put more electricity in the grid. We've had that in place since the late 70s. So that is not unusual, and building more of those projects makes sense. But what makes no sense is wind turbines by the hundreds, if not more, and indeed solar panels by the thousands, if not more, displacing one coal-fired power station. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the cost of this stuff was just going to leverage up incredibly quickly. And, everyone, the environmentalists love to say, oh, this stuff's cleaner. It's like, well, in one sense, it probably is. But in another sense, if you've got to factor in all the land clearing and all the materials that go into all these dispersed networks of transmission of concrete, of building access roads, of land clearing, and all this other stuff, is it really environmentally better?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to question that.
Well, we had one project northwest of Rockhampton that's seen 170 koalas at last count displaced or killed, and mountaintops lopped off to put wind turbines up there because the way the winds work in that part of Queensland, you've got to go up higher. You've got to go up on the top of a mountain And then the mud and rocks and so forth from lopping off the top of the hill flows into creeks which flow out to the Great Barrier Reef. Even the greenies, the conservationists are even going off their brain about this. They don't follow the usual conservation laws. These environmentalists get around it every time. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'll just say one other thing also there, Gary. Like, obviously, the costs continue to rise because you basically get diminishing returns, right? So you're going to put the wind turbines in the best places to start with, and then once those places are taken up, you've got to then go to the second best option, and then the third best option, then the fourth best option. And so as we keep building these things out, they're going to be further away in less optimal locations, which means you're going to get less generation and they're going to cost more to transmit because you've got to go further. So this whole thing is, we've probably already picked the best locations, right, for the ones we've already built. And as we keep building this stuff out, it's going to get less and less efficient and more costly.
Yeah, and that just goes on our power bill, Leith. So therefore, apparently, according to government, it's cheap. But we're all paying more for electricity. And before we had all this renewable in the grid, we just had cheap, reliable and constant baseload power. And that was thank you to coal. Anyway, nuclear is another discussion for another day, and I think that it's got to come because we just can't turn our back on it. The rest of the world's embracing it. Good to talk to you again, Leith. I appreciate your time today. Leith Van Onselen. I mean, this is South Australia's the example that's triggered it, but we're not that stupid in Queensland, are we? I don't think so. The Premier's giving me some comfort that he's not that stupid. Thank heavens for that. But in South Australia, they're right into it. As I said, good thing they grow a lot of wine down there.